Hi, my name is Bob Neesmith, and I've worked for the last 10 years as a naturalist and interpretive guide here in South Florida. I'd like to talk to you today a little bit about the problem of invasive exotic Burmese pythons in the Everglades National Park and the surrounding ecosystems here. This problem has caught a lot of news attention of late. But it really came home to me when I saw a report on the Everglades site at nps.gov from Skip Snow, who's the biologist there, he reported that their census of small mammals showed up to 99% declines in many of the small mammals. This includes the raccoons, possums, and bobcats. And as if 99% isn't bad enough, rabbits and foxes were not seen at all during this census period. So this is a precipitous decline by anybody's measure. And the only thing we can point to that has changed during that period is the increase in the population of Burmese pythons. Now that population of Burmese pythons, depending on which site you go to, again the Everglades site at nps.org, they tend to go with about a 30,000 figure as their estimate of the current population. The Fish and Wildlife Service, they're quoting a number over 100,000. So any way you look at that, it's a serious population. And since the first python was sighted back in 1979, till the first nest was found here in 2006, which verified the suspicions that they were indeed a reproductive population of pythons in the Everglades. We've seen all this trouble develop with the declines in populations of our mammals and so forth. So it's a huge problem. And speaking of huge things, the snakes themselves are incredibly large as well. To give you an idea, the biggest one we found so far is 17 foot 7 inches, a shade under 250 pounds. It was a female, and this female was carrying 87 eggs. So reproductively, they are quite prolific. With that type of numbers, it doesn't take long before you start seeing exponential growth in these creatures, unless something holds them back. So what I want to do is touch on very quickly in this talk a little bit about the nature of invasive exotics, so you got some understanding of how thorny an issue this is and why they do so much better in many cases than the native populations, and touch a little bit more on the broader repercussions for the ecosystem, and finish up with efforts to stem the tide of this invasion and what you can do to help as well as an individual. So let me start by saying that this is the first time in the history of the planet where an apex predator has been transferred from one environment to another and allowed to get established in a reproductive population. An apex predator is the top of the food chain. So these snakes are going to be competing directly with our alligators. And we do see them fighting back and forth. There's some dramatic incidences of those, and sometimes the alligators win, sometimes the snakes win. It depends on the size and the situation. But as you can see from these photographs, they are competing probably on a daily basis out there. Now, in terms of why invasives are so difficult to fight off and to control, there are a few things that are not immediately obvious and I think are very interesting. One is outlined in a report by Professor Mark Torchin, and he's with the University of California at Santa Barbara, and his report can be found on the ucsb.edu site. He talks about something that's not so obvious, and that's parasitic load. Every species has parasites that hold it back in its home range, and the average of about 16 parasites per species. Now, when we move a species from one place to the other, we don't go out and try to get all the 16 parasites and bring it with it. We bring just that egg or that seed or what have you. Once they're here, they find that the average is that those species will have 3 of the parasites that were holding it back in the home range. And over time, it may gain another 4 that will still equal less than half of the parasitic load of the native population. So they still have a tremendous advantage in that sense in terms of survival. And these snakes can live for up to 30 years. That gives them approximately 25 years of reproductive lifespan, producing upwards of 100 eggs each year. And it doesn't take a mathematician to figure out where that one's going. So we've got less of a load, less things holding it back, prolific reproduction rates, and the repercussions, as we talked about earlier, are being seen in the mammal population. And it's worse than that, because they don't stop at just mammals, obviously. These are generalists in their diet, and they're generalists in their habitat. So they can spread across the aquatic habitats we have here in the marshes, into the pine flatlands, up into the hammocks. They've been spotted swimming across Florida Bay down to the Keys, and been trapped down there as well. So the limitations are not, there really aren't many limitations to their spread. Actually, we have this map from the United States Geological Survey that estimates that roughly a third of the continental United States will be available to these snakes as habitat when we look at the climatic similarities between here and Southeast Asia, which is their natural home. So some of the solutions we're looking at, some of the things that we hope will limit the spread naturally is cold. They're cold-blooded animals. There will be some natural limits to their spread to the north. And we did see, we have results of a study from Professor Frank Mazzotti of the University of Florida, and this is a report when they were studying these snakes in January of 2010. They had 10 snakes that were fitted with radio receivers, or radio transmitters rather, and there was a record cold snap that happened for 10 days in the first couple of weeks of January of 2010. And during that time period, 9 of the 10 snakes perished from the cold. So that gives us some hope. Now you can find that study at springerlink.com if you'd like to look at it a little more in depth. So that gives us some hope in terms of cold snaps and cold limitations. Other than that, the things we're doing, or some of the things you might have seen already, are trying to encourage hunting to lower the numbers of these things. And we just finished just recently the first annual Python challenge, where people were encouraged to take a course online, given prizes for the longest snake and the largest number of pythons, and that did a great deal to give us more data about the snakes and where they're located, what they're feeding on, and so forth. Additionally, another strategy which is being very useful for us is using Judas snakes. That's where we take captured snakes and plant them with 2 radio transmitters to make sure, in case one of them fails, we can still find the snakes, and then using those snakes' pheromones to bring in other snakes. And that's a pretty successful strategy right now. Still only a drop in the bucket compared to the tens of thousands of the snakes that are out there, but we're at least learning more every day about the nature of these animals. Meanwhile, we're trying to synthesize the pheromone chemicals so that we'll have a natural, an artificial source of that pheromone that we can use to bait traps, and that may be our best success in the long term, using their own chemistry against them, as it would be. So in summary, as I mentioned to you, I wanted to talk about why we should care. These snakes are out there in the swamp. What does it have to do with me? I mean, on my daily basis, am I going to be affected by all these pythons out there? Let alone, let's set aside for the moment that they will arrive here eventually. We're already seeing them in Collier Seminole State Park, which is just a few miles out to the east of us, and it's just a matter of time before we start seeing them in the urban areas here around Naples, because they don't have any, they have no fear of coming into built up areas. So it will happen eventually here. But what I'd like to leave you with is the words of John Muir. John Muir was one of our first conservationists and great environmentalists. He was the founder of the Sierra Club and fundamental in the founding of Yosemite and Sequoia National Parks. He said, when we try to pick out anything by itself, we find that it is bound by 1,000 invisible cords that cannot be broken to everything else in the universe. So when we see these things happening, when we see these destructive trends in the balance of our ecosystem, we should be sensitive to the fact that it does affect us. It may not be immediately obvious, but there are effects. They will rebound to us eventually, whether you go out there on a regular basis or not. These things are important, and I hope you are sensitive to that. And in terms of what you can do as an individual, call or write to your representatives. Make sure that they understand the seriousness of the problem, and enough funds are being put forth in fighting and containing and hopefully eventually eradicating this species from our system here. Additionally, if you know any exotic pet owners, encourage them to never release these animals if they become tiresome or they get too large. What happened a lot with these pythons is people got them when they were small, 12, 20 inches long as a baby. A year later, this thing's 11, 12 foot long. A year after that, it's 15 feet long, 200 pounds, and it loses its novelty somewhat in the back bedroom. So they tend to release them. Others found their way into the ecosystem by way of acts of God, hurricanes destroying zoos and breeding facilities. And lastly, you can report them. If you see a snake, unless you know what you're doing, don't try to impose upon it, but you can call 888 I've got one and alert the Florida Wildlife Services that where it's located, and they'll try to get a team out there as soon as possible. I appreciate your time and attention. I hope it was informative. Thank you.